Welcome to Off Hours, a conversation between John Edwards and Chris Manning.
A little bit of follow-up from our last episode. One thing that I completely blanked on when I was discussing Maker Central was meeting Dominic Morrow. He is a maker. His company makes laser cutters. He was an exhibitor at Maker Central. And I ran into him because he was wandering around with some headphones on, and another guy beside him, and they were talking. They had mics on their headphones, and they were talking to each other, and they had an audio engineer with them, and I'm kind of curious about what was going on. And his audio engineer looks over at our table and sees the postcards I had made up, John designed for us for the podcast, and he says, "Oh, a podcast for makers." And so they stopped, and Dominic chatted for a couple of minutes, and we recorded a little segment for his podcast. His podcast is the Bricolage Podcast. We'll make sure we put a link in the show notes for that. And he's been interviewing makers over the last little while and put up a few really good episodes. And so we'll link to that. I don't know when he's going to put up the content that he and I recorded there. And since I'm going to be back in his part of the world later on in the year in September, we've sort of tentatively decided to try and meet up again and see if we can record a little bit. But I just want to give a quick shout out to Dominic and the Bricolage Podcast. And we had a good chat for about 20 minutes at the show. We'll make sure that we mention it and put a link in the show when I actually get a link to the episode that we recorded. Another bit of follow-up from our last episode, we were talking about the Goldsmiths Hall and the term hallmarking. And while we said that the Company of Goldsmiths was originally founded in 1327, the hall didn't require people bring their pieces to be assayed at the hall until 1478. So it was actually quite a while before they realized that they couldn't continue to go door to door and actually check on all the pieces. So 1478 is when the first assaying office was set up at the Goldsmiths Hall in London, and that's when the term hallmark began its use in English.
Yes, I still find it fascinating that that's where the term hallmarking came from. It's obvious in hindsight.
Yeah, it's a remarkable history when you consider the length of continuous use that assaying office has been through. So absolutely remarkable. They're still doing it today.
So welcome back home again. How do you like the hospitality at Pearson Airport?
I'm okay with the hospitality of Pearson. It's Air Canada that I'm not particularly happy with these days. I just came back from the Santa Fe Symposium in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And on my return flight, I had a weird flight back. I went through Houston and then Toronto and then Ottawa. I arrived in Toronto about 3 hours before my flight was supposed to leave to Ottawa. And normally that wouldn't bother me so much, but my flight to Ottawa was supposed to leave at midnight. So I wanted to try and get on an earlier flight, and Air Canada was having none of that. They said, nope, sorry, you can't get on a plane that your luggage isn't on, and we can't get your luggage on the earlier flight, so you're going to have to wait around. So I sat at the Air Canada lounge for a few hours and availed myself of their chips and dip, which is not particularly exciting, and got home at, I guess, around 2 o'clock in the morning, because, of course, our flight was delayed leaving, and found out that my luggage wasn't actually on the same plane that I was. Turns out that it had never left Houston. So I wasn't particularly happy when I found out that I had waited around in Toronto for a few extra hours when I could have been at home and sleeping instead. That wasn't particularly fun. The joys of international travel.
So how was the symposium?
The symposium was great. This is one of those events that is so useful on so many different levels. Everything from meeting other people and networking with other people in the industry, to the great information that's going on at the talks, to just being able to spend time with friends and do some fun and exciting things. So overall, the whole symposium was amazing. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we did and some of the talks that we had. But yeah, overall, just an absolutely amazing time.
So how many years is it that you've attended this symposium now?
This is my second year. I was a speaker last year on my first trip, and I'm a speaker again this year. And as I found out, Janet Halderman, she's the amazing woman who ends up editing all these papers that we write and is the one who sort of organizes who's going to be a speaker and when people are speaking and things like that. And I found out that she's already penciled me in for a talk next year. So she's kind of got my number now. It's tough to say no at this point. So I suspect I'm going to be a speaker again next year as well.
Is that something you're looking forward to?
Oh yeah. In fact, I think I've got an interesting idea for next year's talk. It'll be a little bit different than what I've done the last few years. The last few years I've been speaking about niello and discussing both the historical context of it and making it, and also some experiments with making a more modern version of it. So it's been a very technical sort of how-to that's directed towards people who are actively making. But I think next year I've got a slightly different topic in mind, and we'll have to see if I can pull it off. So I've got some ideas for next year already.
So what specifically about niello did you cover in this year's talk?
Most of our listeners probably aren't going to know what that is. It's a silver alloy that's been used traditionally for the last 3,500 years or so. And it's a black metal that you inlay into another metal. So, for instance, you could inlay it into bronze, as the Romans did, or you could inlay it into silver and gold like I do. And it provides a really great contrast metal against whatever your base object is. So it looks, you get this beautiful black contrast with it. And unlike a lot of other ways of getting a black surface, this isn't just a surface finish. This isn't a patina or some sort of surface treatment. This color goes all the way through the metal, which ends up making it very ideal for anything that involves any kind of wear, any type of handling and things like that, where it's possible for the surface treatment to rub off. Traditionally, niello has been made with lead as one of the alloying metals, and it was alloyed with lead to help lower the melting temperature of the metal. The way that you inlay niello into another metal is that you're actually going to melt it in, and you're going to fuse it in place. And you want the melting temperature to be much lower than the base material. Obviously, you don't want to have let's say a pendant or a brooch or something like that, and you're inlaying the niello into it, and the silver ends up melting, or the gold or whatever it is you've made the brooch out of. So the lead helps lower that melting temperature to a point where you can actually apply it. But of course, there are all sorts of problems with using lead. And so this year's paper was all about getting the lead out of the niello and making a safer alternative. So safer not just for the maker, but also for the people who are using it. In many countries, like for instance the EU, you're not allowed selling any jewelry that has lead in it in any form. So that causes problems for people who want to use niello but are unable to because it has lead in it, and they can't sell it in the EU or the UK or anywhere like that. So yeah, this year's paper was all about getting that lead out of the niello and finding alternatives to that lead.
Now, is there anyone else who has attempted to eliminate lead from niello as well, or is this an area of the field that you're very much a pioneer in?
The early days of making niello were completely without lead, and so there were lead-free versions of niello very, very early on. What the Egyptians and the Romans were using had silver and copper in it, but the problem with that was the melting temperature of it was much too high, and that causes all sorts of problems. I won't get into the weeds on it too much, but it creates issues when you're trying to apply niello when the melting temperature is too high. The trick was to get a niello that has no lead but still has something in it that's going to lower the temperature. I know that there have been some experiments in Thailand on replacing the lead, and Thailand being one of the few places now where niello is still actively used by the jewelry industry. It's continued to remain a part of their tradition, their jewelry tradition for most of that time. And I believe they've experimented with using tin as a replacement for lead. While I'm certainly not the first person to do it, I know that I've done a fair bit of research into this now, and certainly done a lot more experimentation than anybody else I've read about. Now, of course, there's probably a lot of people doing work in Thailand on this that I just don't know about. But I have read a few papers now that have sort of touched on it and have seen some of their experiments, but not a lot compared to what I've done so far.
And how successful have your experiments been thus far?
They've been pretty good. There's certainly not a perfect replacement for niello with lead in it. The lead version of niello is certainly the gold standard at this point. It's been the nicest in terms of working with. It has a very low melting temperature. The formula that I have is very black and very easy to work with. So that's one of the challenges with it, is that the replacements that I've come up with are pretty good, and people who don't know any better and certainly don't have a comparison against the other one probably wouldn't notice the difference between them. But for people who know the difference, it certainly does stand out as being a little bit lighter in color than it's sort of a very, very dark gray as opposed to being a nice black.
Did you present a specific recipe for niello at the symposium? Or did you present several variants that you've been working on?
Yeah, this year's talk was sort of a little bit of follow-up from last year. So I covered a few of the things that I covered last year, but in more detail. And I also did some new material as well. The follow-up had to do primarily with the application methods. I had more videos this time around of the application of niello and how to make it and how to apply it and everything like that. And those are videos that I'm going to put together. Right now, they're just audioless videos that have been sort of broken up into a couple different pieces. So I'm going to put those together and narrate them, and I'll probably put them up on YouTube for people to see. Since seeing that stuff in a video is very helpful, and it certainly makes things easier to know what's going on. And then the new content that I had in there primarily revolved around the experiments that I was doing. So while I didn't discuss the exact details in my talk, those are in my paper, and that paper will go up online and be available for free on the Santa Fe Symposium website. So if you want to read that paper, you can read the details. And in there, I tried using 4 different metals to replace lead. I basically looked around the periodic table near lead to see what was there, and I had a few criteria for what I was looking for. Obviously, I wanted something that wasn't toxic. If you are dealing with something that is toxic, then that doesn't really help. And in fact, some of the things that are around lead on the periodic table are much nastier than lead is. So I wanted to avoid that. It obviously needed to be something that was reasonably available. You don't want to put something that's extremely difficult to find or very, very rare. So I tried to avoid any element that was sort of rare and expensive or difficult to get a hold of. And then it also needed to be something that could lower the temperature of the alloy. So it needed to have a relatively low melting temperature in and of itself. Now, I know that there are metallurgists out there who would probably look at my choices and say, well, there was no way that was ever going to work because of X, Y, and Z. But obviously, I don't have a metallurgy background, so this was pure experimentation on my part.
So what were the 4 elements that you ultimately settled on?
I ended up using indium, bismuth, gallium, and tin as my alternatives. And each of them met with either complete failure or varying levels of success, depending on what I was doing with it. So it was an interesting choice in terms of, which ones worked, which ones didn't. The gallium was a complete failure, which is a bit of a disappointment. Honestly, I would have loved to have a good excuse to keep gallium around in the shop. If you've never played with gallium, it's actually liquid at room temperature. So it looks like mercury at room temperature. You can hold it in your hand and sort of roll it around, and it is liquid. And it kind of freaks people out if you start playing with that in your hand because they think it's mercury, but it isn't. It's gallium, and so gallium was a complete failure. It didn't turn black at all. But I had varying levels of success with the other 3, and ultimately I ended up using a tin-based alloy for it. And the tin-based alloy was actually pretty good. I was reasonably happy with the results that I got out of it. And I think with some more experimentation, I can improve it even more. The biggest part of it being I need to lower the temperature more. Its existing melting temperature is still a little bit too high for my liking. So I'd like to be able to lower that temperature a little bit and get a little bit more copper into it. The copper facilitates the niello becoming blacker. The more copper I can put in there, the better. But of course, the more copper that's in there, the higher the melting temperature of the alloy, because copper has a very high melting temperature itself.
So is the tin recipe for niello that you came up with entirely unique, or was it influenced in any way by some of what you were aware of coming out of Thailand?
This one's entirely unique to me, as far as I know. At least, if someone else is using a similar alloy, it's unknown to me. I created this through experimentation, playing around with some of the proportions a little bit to see what worked and what didn't. I started using the recipe that I had last year that I was making using my lead niello. So basically, I just did a one-to-one replacement lead for tin, and that worked out poorly. The melting temperature wasn't nearly low enough. That caused me a lot of problems. So I went back to first principles and created a silver copper alloy that had a very low melting temperature, or at least as low a melting temperature as you can get with silver and copper. And that works out to being around 72% silver and the balance being copper. And then I started adding my alternate metals to that to try and lower the melting temperature even more. And again, that worked out reasonably well in different, depending on which metal it was. And some of them, like indium, didn't lower the temperature very much at all. So I stopped using indium early on. But the bismuth and the tin, I think, have a good chance of being alternatives. And I think mixing a little bit of bismuth in with the tin would actually be helpful. It has a much lower melting temperature than tin, and it is used in electronics actually to create low melting solders with tin. So I think I may end up with some combination of the two metals together to actually lower the temperature a little bit and see what happens.
So what went wrong with the indium and the gallium?
In the case of the gallium, it didn't turn black at all. What's happening with this is I'm calling this a metal alloy, but it really isn't. It's a metal sulfide that you're creating, and you're mixing sulfur in with these metals. Those sulfides become very black. And in this case, gallium does not form a sulfide that is black. If it does form a sulfide at all, I'm not sure. I'd have to talk to a metallurgist, not someone who just plays at being a metallurgist, to find out whether it actually forms a sulfide or not, but I don't believe it does. So that's the problem with the gallium, is that it ends up being a gray as opposed to a black, and a very light gray at that. You can see the difference basically between the silver and the gallium-based niello. There is enough of a color difference that you can see it, but it's not enough that you can do anything useful with it.
So you still at least get a contiguous alloy out of it. It's just that it's not black. It's not like it turns into an oozing monster of metal goop.
No. It does become a continuous alloy, and it is something that you could, presumably you could use it for something if you really wanted to. It is a lower temperature metal than silver is, for instance. So I guess if you had something like gold, you could conceivably inlay this into gold to create some contrast. But it isn't nearly as white as silver, so it's not going to look all that great. I don't know that there's really much use for it in this case. I don't know that there's much that you could actually do with it.
And then the indium.
Yeah, the indium one, the problem there was the temperature. I just couldn't I couldn't get the temperature low enough with the indium to make it usable. And by that I mean it needs to get below 650 degrees Celsius and it needs to be flowing lower than 650 degrees Celsius. And the reason for that is because the metal sulfides you've created start breaking down at around 650. So if you have to heat it up well above 650 to get it to flow properly, you're going to do a lot of damage to the sulfides, and it's not going to look very good. You're going to have porosity problems and everything like that in it. So the key is you need to make sure you get it down low enough so that you can actually inlay it and apply it properly.
And to the best of my knowledge, indium is quite a rare metal as well. So that doesn't quite fit in your top criteria there.
You're right. It was the most expensive of the lot of them. It was even more expensive than gallium was. And it is quite rare these days. Well, I shouldn't say it is rare, but it's used in a lot of electronics these days. So I believe it's being used in LCD panels and things like that as well. And, that makes it quite valuable to other industries that need it in large quantities. So yeah, indium is not the ideal metal, but I figure for the amount of it that we were making, most of this stuff, most of these pieces that we're making have a huge amount of handwork being put into them. So if there is in fact, an expensive material that you have to put in there, it's not the end of the world. It's being offset quite a bit by the expense of the labor in there anyways. So, in the end, the base material as well, indium, while it's expensive, is still significantly less expensive than silver is, for instance, or, exponentially less expensive than gold.
Interestingly, too, with the indium, if you actually mix the indium with tin, which you're also using, and then throw in a bit of oxygen, you end up, if in a thin enough layer or sheet of it, it actually is transparent. So it's complete opposite of what you're trying to achieve, which is kind of fascinating, because that's why they use it in the LCD panels. Indium tin oxide is the transparent electrodes that allow all these fancy phones and laptops and TVs to operate the way that they do.
And in this case, it's not really pure indium, right? You're not dealing with the indium metal as it is. You're really dealing with the sulfide of indium. So that changes the equation a little bit as well. So, anyways, it's an interesting process, and there have been a few people who've offered to give me some assistance with analyzing some of my pieces to see exactly what's going on. We're a bit curious to see what's happening at the interface between the base object and the niello that you're fusing into it, because there is a fusion bond that's happening there. So we're a little bit curious about what's happening there. We're also curious to see which type of crystals are forming in the niello, because depending on what's being formed there are ways that we may be able to influence that crystal creation and change the way that the metal functions, change the properties of it, and sort of experiment with it a little bit. And if nothing else, maybe try and optimize what's going on. It should be interesting. There's certainly some more to come on this. I've got a few more ideas of things that I can do with it. And I certainly by no means have the perfect recipe yet. That will take a little bit more experimentation and work before I get something that I'm truly satisfied with.
Now, is there anyone else who's at this symposium who dabbles in niello or is an expert in niello, or are you a bit of a lone ranger in that respect?
Unfortunately, there are not a lot of people anymore in the Western jewelry world who are using niello. As I said, there's still people in Thailand that are using it quite a bit. It is very popular in Thai jewelry. And there are a few places in Russia that still use it. Although I haven't spoken to anybody or seen anything coming out of that group. I think it's quite small compared to the group in Thailand. I haven't spoken to a lot of people who've made it. The reaction I get when I talk to people about niello, when I talk to Western jewelers about niello, typically range from I have no idea what that is to, oh, I read about that once in, Opie Untracked book on jewelry technology 30 years ago, and I've never really thought about it since because it looked like a horrible thing to make and a miserable process. So yeah, it's not something that very many Western jewelers are making. And then of course with modern consumer protection laws around jewelry, anyone who's in the EU has completely dismissed the use of niello just because it's not something that they could sell in Europe. So, it's something that hasn't seen a lot of attention lately, which is too bad because it's been one of the most commonly used techniques over millennia for decorating silver and gold. And it's even been used, as I said, it's been used in bronze work as well earlier on. And in the Middle Ages, it was even being used as an inlay in armor. So you had niello and gold inlay in armor to do patterns on, let's say a pauldron on the shoulder or something like that. So yeah, it's too bad that it isn't used more. And part of the reason why I've given this talk is to try and promote its use and see if I can get people using it again, because it is a beautiful material.
Yeah, I've seen that on armor before. I had no idea that was niello.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, the first time that niello ever registered on my radar was more than a decade ago when I visited the Worshipful Company of Watch and Clockmakers Guildhall Museum, which you just saw when you were in London at the Science Museum there, which we touched on in our last episode. And that's the first time that I ever read the word niello and had it tied to an object, and it was on a number of the pocket watch cases that they had on exhibit there.
Absolutely. It was extremely common in decorative metalwork. And in fact, if you were living in, let's say, Florence in the Middle Ages, let's say you're 15th century Florence and you wanted to be a jeweler, you wanted to be a goldsmith of some sort, if you didn't know how to make niello and how to use niello, you were unemployable as a goldsmith. It was such a critical skill. It was being used in nearly everything at the time. So it's certainly something that has seen a lot of use over the years, and it's really unfortunate that it doesn't see more use now. So hopefully it does start to see more use. There were a few people who suggested I should go around and try teaching at a couple of the jewelry schools in the States. So we'll see what comes out of some of that. I'm certainly open to teaching it. So if you happen to be running a school that is interested in discussing a class on niello work, certainly modern niello work without lead in it, let me know. I'm happy to discuss it, because I think it's a worthwhile technique, and it's a way that you can distinguish your designs from other people, because it is such a unique look, and it creates this beautiful contrasty metal that you can't really get any other way.
And that would certainly fit into your theme for the year as well.
Absolutely. Got to keep sharing the knowledge, right?
And the videos you intend to release will be a solid step in that direction as well. And of course, this presentation that you just delivered fits squarely within the theme.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about the Santa Fe Symposium is its dedication to trying to share knowledge in the industry and trying to create a dialogue in the industry amongst the leaders in it. The Santa Fe Symposium was started 32 years ago by Eddie Bell. At the time, he owned Rio Grande, the jewelry tool supplier out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he wanted a place for sort of the best people in the industry to come together and be able to share their knowledge. So it's not just jewelers that are there, it's also business people that are there, and people in auxiliary industries as well. So you find casters there and refiners and things like that. So you end up with a really broad range of topics at these symposiums. One of the women who's been giving talks for the last several years, I think this was her 7th year doing that, was Ann Miller. She works for IBM, and she actually works on the Watson project with them. So she's given a number of talks over the years on how machine learning can assist with the jewelry industry. This year, she was talking a lot about predictive modeling for supply chains and how they're starting to use predictive modeling to be able to develop better supply chain models for the industry, as well as talking about IBM's blockchain technology for business. You get some really interesting stuff that happens in there. And again, everything from people who are bench jewelers, you get people like Phil Poirier and Peter Gilroy or Anne Cahoon, and they're practicing jewelers who are giving talks on very specific techniques and how to improve your jewelry making using these techniques. You then end up with people like Dr. Chris Cordy, who was talking. He's a metallurgist. He's a retired metallurgist. So he gives very technical talks about how the science of metallurgy works with regards to precious metals. So yeah, it's a fascinating group of people. And if you're involved at all in the jewelry industry, this is a great symposium to go to. You can learn so much. Even the talks that may not be what you're interested in can be very fascinating. There's some really good information in them. And if nothing else, you get to meet some amazing people while you're there. There's a remarkable group of people that show up at this.
So what were some of the standout talks for you, apart from your own, of course?
Well, of course, mine was a standout talk. No, I enjoyed my talk. I think it went better than last year. So all joking aside, I think my talk did go very well this year, and it was well received by people. There were a few that really stood out for me. There was one by David Fletcher from Cooks and Gold in Birmingham, and another one by Damiano, and I can't remember his last name, from Pro Gold in Italy. They were talking about 3D printing in metals. So both of them were talking about selective laser melting in platinum metals and being able to do work in that. Dave had this absolutely remarkable bracelet with him that was incredible. This thing was 3D printed as a single piece, and when you flipped it over, one side was 18 karat yellow gold, the other side was 18 karat white gold, and it was all fused as a single piece. So they printed half of it and then changed out the printing medium, and then finished the second half. And it was printed as a single piece, but it was still flexible. So the whole piece could could wrap around your wrist, and the movement in it was just gorgeous. So yeah, the stuff that people are doing with that was amazing. So that was nice to see. Phil Poirier did a really good talk on straight line engine engraving at this symposium. He's been doing a series of talks over the last several years about various types of ornamental turning and guilloche work. So this year he was talking about straight line work. Now I'm only slightly biased since some of my work showed up in there, and there was a video of me working in there. But it was still a good talk, and it was interesting. It's nice to see again a very traditional skill that most modern jewelers don't know how it's done, and being able to show that off and show what's going on in in videos and whatnot. So that was nice to see. And then certainly the best speaker of the symposium was the very last talk, and that was friend of the show, Matt Anderson. He works for Rio Grande, and he's one of the business coaches there. He gave this great talk about how they collaborate at Rio Grande, how they problem solve, how they are able to lead their team to being able to do the best work that they can. It was a fascinating talk, and this is something that's outside of just the jewelry industry. This can be used by anybody. It's not specific to working inside of the industry, but these kinds of talks are also very useful to us. We tend to get focused on the jewelry specific stuff while we're there, but this talk about business in general, how to collaborate, how to problem solve, how to work through difficult business issues. It was a great talk. Fascinating to hear Matt talk, and he's such a great public speaker. So hopefully we get to see him speaking outside of the Santa Fe Symposium. The other nice thing about this symposium is that all of the papers from the symposium are made available online for free. So a few weeks from now, all of those talks will be available for download. I shouldn't say the talks are available for download. The papers themselves are available for download. The talks are really only for those people who attend the symposium. So even though the papers are excellent, it is certainly worthwhile seeing the talks themselves and seeing those in person.
Now, you and Phil and some of the other speakers got to head down to Santa Fe a little bit earlier than the rest of the attendees for a special speakers trip. You want to share a little bit about what you guys got up to there?
And one of the unique things about the Santa Fe Symposium is the speakers trip. Now, for people who are attending the conference itself, the symposium, that starts on Sunday morning and goes until Wednesday at noon. But if you happen to be a speaker of the trip, then you get invited onto the speakers trip ahead of time. And that typically starts on the Wednesday before the symposium, and then runs to Saturday when we then get to Albuquerque and get into the symposium itself. It is a bit of a unique experience compared to most conferences in it, and it's certainly worthwhile. So the speakers are all invited to a city somewhere in the U.S. Last year it was St. Louis. This year it was Albuquerque itself. They decided to stay in Albuquerque. And so the conference basically, you fly in and the conference takes care of you, and we do various things together. So we go to, we do some field trips together and things like that. And it's a chance to get the speakers together beforehand, sort of give them a chance to meet each other and chat and be able to network a little bit before the symposium itself and sort of become comfortable with what's going on. It's also a great opportunity for people who've never spoken before to talk to people who have spoken before and get some, get an idea of what the conference is going to be like, or ask them how they should, if there's things that they should do when they're talking, things they shouldn't do, that kind of thing. So It's a really worthwhile trip. And one of the big pluses, if you're ever thinking about submitting a paper to the symposium, this is one of the reasons to do it. In fact, as I was mentioning to somebody at the end of my trip, if I had to give up one of the two, if I had to give up either the symposium or the speaker's trip, I would give up the symposium for the speaker's trip in a heartbeat. It is that good. It's that worthwhile.
So what are some of the things that you got up to as a group of speakers?
Yeah, this year there were a few really good exhibits that we got to see. So the first thing that we did, first off, we stayed at Los Poblanos Inn in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a fascinating inn that's there. It's a converted farm. In fact, it's still an active lavender farm now. That's what it was known for originally, and it is still an active farm today. And it's a beautiful location, really, really nice place. If you're in Albuquerque and you're looking for somewhere to stay, Los Poblanos Inn, I can highly recommend. It was a really good exhibit, a really good time there. But the first thing that we did, which was absolutely fascinating, was we went up to Santa Fe and we went to this exhibit. Well, I guess it's not an exhibit; it's a permanent location. It's called Meow Wolf, which sounds a little bit odd, and it is a bit odd. In fact, it's really, really odd. It's basically an art installation that was created, and it has a theme that goes through it and a narrative that goes through it. And it's this bizarre place that has, all sorts of interesting art that people have created in it. And I guess when you enter in, you go through the doors, and there's this large house that's there. So there's a full-sized house that they've built in here. And, there's a porch on the front, and if you look in the mailbox, you can start reading their mail and you can see what's going on. You can start following the narrative of what's happening there. And as you go through this room, through this house, there are all these clues about what's been happening there and whatnot. And it gets a little bit weird because you can do things like they recommend that you try everything. You open everything, you look inside of everything, you read things, which is impractical on a first visit. I think they said there's something like 382 hours of material if you sit down and read it all from start to finish. You're not going to read it all in one shot. But you do things like you open the fridge door and you realize that it's actually a portal to another part of the exhibit. So you can crawl through the fridge, and you end up basically in another world that they've created inside of this building. And there are a number of interesting portals like that are there. There's some great interactive music exhibits and things. We'll see if we can find a good link to post to it online. It's a truly bizarre experience, but it is worthwhile doing. I think they said they're opening up another one in Denver and one in Las Vegas over the next year or two. So if you happen to be anywhere near one of these, go and see it. Spend the morning. I know we spent about 2 hours in there, and we definitely didn't get through all of it. There were some rooms that we were talking to friends later, and they found rooms that we didn't find and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a really weird experience, but it was certainly one of the most interesting art experiences I've had in years.
So will you be entering your studio through a fridge anytime soon?
It is tempting. I'm tempted to replace maybe put the fridge up against the wall of my shop and turn that into a portal into my studio. That'd be a fun way of getting in and out of the studio. It might be a little challenging for getting tools in and out though.
Yeah. Especially some of the heavier things you've got kicking around in there.
Yeah. Although the fridge, to be honest, the fridge wasn't too bad because that you just had to sort of bend down a little bit. The one that was really awkward was the washing machine, and trying to get down into that. You had to open that up, and then you had to sort of hold on to the top edge and then swing your legs down and slide down the slide into the washing machine itself. So that was an interesting time.
Yeah, I can't imagine hoisting a straight line engine up through the washing machine.
No, that's not going to fit at all. Yeah.
So were some other highlights from the speaker's trip?
Yeah, we went to a bunch of places. One of the other things that we, everybody there loves great food, so we always end up at great restaurants and whatnot while we're there. We did go up Sandia Peak, which is there's a tram that goes up the peak that's just outside of Albuquerque, and I think it goes up to around 10,000 feet. Beautiful views of the valley and of Albuquerque itself. Beautiful scenery. They're currently working on a new restaurant up there, so there was some construction going on up there. But it's a worthwhile visit up the peak if you happen to be in the area. So that was nice to see. And then probably the real gem of this particular visit was Eddie Bell, who, as I said, he was the founder of Rio Grande and the founder of the Santa Fe Symposium. He lives in Albuquerque, and he invited us all to his home for dinner one night. So we got a chance to see his home and see some of the pieces that he's collected over the years, and most importantly, see his workshop. So of course you've got 35 people or whatever that arrived at Eddie's house, and every one of us made a beeline for his workshop before anything else. So that was an amazing chance to see some of his machines. He's got a nice modern machine shop in there, but he also has things like a Holzapfel ornamental lathe. He has an Armbruster Mark I. In fact, he has the very first Armbruster Mark I ornamental lathe. So it was kind of nice to be able to see some of that stuff in person and be able to play with some of that stuff. Eddie also has a really nice car collection. He restores very old cars, and so it was kind of nice to see some of that as well.
I can imagine. You've got the man who owned the company that supplied most of North America with their jewelry making equipment. I can only imagine what it'd be like to see his workshop.
Yeah, his shop is pretty impressive. He's got some fun toys in there. Yeah, just remarkable work that he's got in there, and a huge workshop. I'm so envious of the size of his space. He has this beautiful open workshop, which is nice. The other thing that was kind of fun, I was telling him my stories about being at the Goldsmiths Company the previous week, and so he brought me up into his office, and he was showing me this little collection of punches that he had. He had been there a few years ago, and in fact, he is one of only 4 or 5 foreigners who is a liveryman of the Goldsmiths Company, and he was there for some social occasion. And in a break, he was sitting looking at an exhibit of pieces in the main hall, and was mentioning to the guy that was standing beside him about how remarkable the punch marks were and the stamps themselves. And so they got to chatting about the stamps, and they were talking about how that technology's changed over the years. And so this guy looks at Eddie and he's like, "Do you want to go down and see how they're made?" And it turns out that the guy he was chatting with is the guy responsible for making all their stamps. He was the guy in charge of all that. So Eddie then got a tour of the workshop where they were making the stamps. And of course, as we mentioned last time, they've gone from hand engraving the stamps to laser engraving them now. But one of the things they had found, I guess they were doing some work after World War II on the building. And I think we mentioned in the last episode, this is the 3rd building that's been on the site, and it's been there since I think around 1835. And during World War II, there was some bomb damage to one corner of the building. And so they were repairing it, and they were modernizing the building a little bit, and I think they were trying to put in some extra toilets or something like that, so they needed to put in some plumbing. And they broke through a wall, and they found this storeroom that had been walled up. And based on the stuff that was in there, it had been walled up since the 1850s. So it wasn't something that had been done because of the war or anything like that, but it had been bricked up for quite some time. And they had these collections of stamps that were in there, like original stamps from that time, which is rather unique because the stamps themselves are actually destroyed after they are finished for the year. So a few weeks ago, there was actually a post on Instagram from the assaying office, and they were showing footage of them taking last year's hallmarks and grinding them off so that people can't use them anymore, because you don't want people creating forgeries. But they found this storeroom full of all these stamp sets. So this guy ended up giving Eddie a collection of number stamps that were remarkable. I guess when they made these number stamps, they made a set of 0 to 9 for all of the numbers, which is a little funny because in hallmarking, there's no reason to use certain numbers. For instance, there's no hallmark that requires a number 4, or let's say a number 1, for instance. There's no requirement for a number 1. And so this guy ended up putting together a collection of hallmark stamps that that are never used for actual hallmarking. So Eddie can't use them for faking an antique piece or whatever. And he ended up giving him this collection. So he was showing me these stamps, and it is remarkable the level of detail and the tiny size of some of these stamps. I was looking at a number 6 stamp with a 10x jeweler's loop, and I could barely see the detail on this stamp, but you could still tell that it was a number 6. It was absolutely remarkable that something like that would have been hand carved in the early 1800s by somebody. Just a remarkable level of skill involved in making these stamps. So that was a pretty amazing thing to see, just how detailed these things were.
Yeah, they wouldn't have had electric light or any sort of power tools, nothing but their bare hands and the tools they crafted and the ambient light around them.
And then whatever mediocre optics were available at the time, because even though optics had been around for centuries at that point, they certainly wouldn't have been as good as the optics we have available today.
Yeah. Wow, phenomenally impressive.
Oh yeah, just remarkable work. And then the other thing that we saw while I was in his office that was impressive is a collection that was given to him on the 30th anniversary of the Santa Fe Symposium. And a number of speakers, past and present, ended up creating little pieces for him. And the theme was Pearls of Wisdom, since that, of course, is what basically the point of the symposium was sharing your wisdom. So there were dozens and dozens of these pieces by some of the best goldsmiths in the world, making pieces for Eddie, thanking him for running the symposium over the years. And some of those pieces were just remarkable. Looking at the detail work, the quality of these pieces was just unbelievable. So yeah, it's he's obviously been in the industry for a long time, and he knows a lot of people. So he's been generous with people, and he's shared a lot of his knowledge and his time with people, and in return, people have been generous with him. So yeah, remarkable man and remarkable house, which is hopefully I get a chance to go back and see it in detail without having 40 other people there competing for time on some of his tools.
Well, it sounds like a fantastic treat, nevertheless.
Yeah, it was remarkable. One of the papers and talks that I really enjoyed hearing about was from Tim McRae and Mathieu Chiminet. Tim's out of, I think he's in Maine, and Mathieu is actually in Montreal, Canada. Tim McRae, if you're in the jewelry world at all, you will be familiar with that name because he started writing how-to books in the jewelry world many, many years ago. And that led to him actually becoming a publisher of books. So there are a lot of amazing jewelry books that have come out that have been either authored by Tim or published by Tim. So he's a well-known name in the industry. And one of the books that he published a number of years ago was from Mathieu, and he had been studying the jewelry techniques of jewelers in West Africa. So he was going to, he would go to somewhere like Dakar, and he would visit with these jewelers who are working in what we would consider to be relatively primitive conditions with a very, very small tool set, and would be producing this absolutely remarkable work. And so they ended up giving a talk on a project they started, I guess, 4 years ago now, called the Toolbox Initiative. And the idea behind it is that they've been bringing over tools that have been donated by jewelers in North America, tools that they no longer need, and they've been bringing them over to Africa with them, to West Africa with them, and donating them to some of the jewelers that they meet over there. And the talk was really well done. There's actually a good video we'll link to that Rio Grande supported and helped produce, showing some of the trips over there that they've done, showing a couple of these jewelers working on things. Mathieu ended up giving a video or two of watching these guys work. And it's funny because I've got a pretty significant selection of tools available to me, and certainly some of the more modern tools that are available to a jeweler. So I have things like I have a wide selection of hammers and pliers and things like that. And I have things like draw plates so that I can make silver or gold wire using this draw plate. I can draw it down to smaller and smaller sizes. But these guys don't necessarily have access to that. They might have 2 pairs of pliers. They might have a single hammer. They won't have a draw plate at all. Watching these guys work is just unbelievable. They are so fast and so good at what they do. Mathieu was saying that he watched a guy take a silver ingot, and in 15 minutes he took his one hammer and he drew that single ingot out into a consistent 1 millimeter wire. And I'm sitting there looking at him. I'm like, I can't do that with my draw plates. Like, it takes me more than 15 minutes to make a length of wire from a silver ingot. So the work that these guys are doing was remarkable. It's beautiful work, and it's an interesting project that they're doing. So we'll link to that, and it's if you happen to be a jeweler who has some extra tools that you don't need anymore, they've got a list of some things that certainly work better for them than others. So there's certain things that are more in demand than other tools are, and you can donate old tools to them, preferably something that's in good condition. You don't want to send something that's broken or whatever, but if you have some old tools sitting around, then you can do that. And if you don't happen to have any old jewelry tools around and you do want to contribute to it, you can donate money as well. And Rio Grande sells them tools at a significant discount to be able to bring over as well. So yeah, it was a remarkable trip that they were showing off. And I say trip, I mean multiple trips. They've been over there a number of times now. Yeah, just remarkable seeing the work these guys are doing. And again, especially the quote unquote primitive conditions that they're in. I don't know that I could produce the work that they're doing in those conditions. And I'm certainly an experienced jeweler. So yeah, just remarkable trip and remarkable journey that they've been on.
Sounds like a really worthwhile initiative.
Yeah, it is. And hopefully it continues going on. And if you're really interested in getting involved, it's also possible to go over with them and visit some of these jewelers and visit some of the towns that they're going into.
So how about the elephant in the room?
I think you're talking about the award that I won at the symposium, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, I ended up winning the very coveted French Elephant Award at the symposium this year, and this is only something that speakers can win. During the speakers trip a number of years ago, I think this goes back to 1999, the speakers had decided on a secret word that they were going to share amongst themselves, and everybody was supposed to try and weave the secret word into their talk in some sort of clever manner. And so this has been a tradition for the last the last 20 years now. It's been going on.
So does this have anything at all to do with the name of the award then? Because it's quite a peculiar name.
Yeah, the French Elephant Award is a little bit odd, and the name did arise from this particular challenge. A number of years ago, Stuart Grice was giving a talk. He works for Hoover and Strong. They're refiners and metal suppliers down in the States, and comes from the UK and had misheard what the secret word was supposed to be. And the secret word that year was fringe element. And he, yeah, you can see where this is going. Stuart's up on stage and he's misheard fringe element. And so he throws out French elephant, which is what he thought he thought it was supposed to be. So the name stuck at that point, and Stuart's talk has gone down in infamy. Although I noticed that he's never actually won the award, so clearly his misuse of the award didn't end up winning it for him that year. But yeah, so every year we try and weave in the secret word into our talks, and some people are better at it than others, and some people completely forget. This year we went on a visit to the Steelbender Brewery in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Matt Anderson, who's one of the speakers and one of the folks at Rio Grande that helps organize this every year, he's very good friends with the owners at the Steelbender Brewery, and so they took us on this great behind the scenes tour back there and taught us all about their brewing technique and whatnot, some of the challenges they have being at altitude, and some of the preferences in the area for how beer should taste. And while we were on the trip, we sort of started thinking about using bender as our word. So it came from the name Steel Bender, and so bender ended up being the secret word for the trip this year. And I was able to weave it into my talk, and I ended up needing to put a photo of my cufflinks that I was working on for my talk into the presentation. I hadn't actually taken a photo of them yet, so I managed to sneak in a sticker from Steel Bender Brewery that they gave me during the talk. So,
nicely done.
Yeah, so for that, I ended up winning the French Elephant Award, and I get to hold on to it for another year.
I was a little perplexed when you posted it online because it wasn't clear from the award that you'd won it, because I didn't see your name or this year anywhere on the award.
Well, let me tell you, John, every single expense was spared with this award. It is a low quality plaque and a low quality award. Although the little elephant was actually hand carved by one of the previous winners, so that is actually quite a nice little touch. But yes, the winners they must engrave their own award if they want their name on it. So have to engrave my own name on it. What can you do?
Offers a nice opportunity for you to show off your craft.
Yeah, well, the other thing is that it's the particular award, as you can see, if you go and check out the show notes, you'll see the award. It's running out of space. There's not a lot of room on there right now for my name, so I'm going to have to figure out some way of expanding the plaque a little bit, I think, and making a little bit more room for winners' names so that I can put my own name on there and hopefully have some space for future winners.
We'll make a miniature pen and perch it behind the ear of the elephant with your name and the year on it.
Yeah, but that doesn't help the next person along.
Well, it could end up like the Stanley Cup, and you just keep adding new bases to the bottom of it.
Adding new rows. I'm thinking about extending the upright so that it keeps sort of pushing up and up and up. So we'll see what I come up with. But yeah, so I am the coveted winner of the award this year, and it stays in Canada, much to the chagrin of the people who were awarding it this year. Chris Plouffe, who was one of the judges this year, he was unhappy that it went back to Canada. Last year, Charles Luton Brain won it, so Chris didn't want to send it back up to Canada, but that's where it's staying for now.
Thanks for listening to Off Hours. You can find detailed show notes at offhours.show. If you'd like to keep up to date with the show, follow us on Twitter @offhours. John can be found on Twitter @UnderTheLoop, and Chris can be found on Twitter and Instagram @silver_hand.